Yo, we're back with the next part of the warrior ethos. The difference between guilt and shame. Sociologists tell us that there are two types of cultures, guilt-based and shame-based. Individuals in a guilt-based culture internalize their society's conceptions of right and wrong. The sinner feels his crime in his guts. He doesn't need anyone to convict him and sentence him. He convicts and sentences himself. The West is a guilt-based culture, since the Judeo-Christian God sees and knows our private deeds and innermost thoughts. We are always guilty of something, with no way out save some form of divine absolution, forgiveness, or grace. A shame-based culture is the opposite. In a shame-based culture, face is everything. All that matters is what the community believes of us. If we have committed murder, but we can convince our fellows that we're innocent, we're home free. On the other hand, if the community believes evil of us, even if we're blameless, we have lost face and honor. Death has become preferable to life. A shame-based culture imposes its values from outside the individual, by the good or bad opinion of the group. The community imposes its code on its members by such acts as shunning and public shaming. The Japanese warrior culture of Bushido is shame-based. It compels those it deems cowards or traitors to commit ritual suicide. The tribal cultures of Pashtunistan are shame-based. The Marine Corps is shame-based. So were the Romans, Alexander's Macedonians, and the ancient Spartans. The maidens of Sparta were taught songs of ridicule with which to humiliate any young man who displayed want of courage in battle. When a warrior accused of being a trembler returned to the city, the pretty young girls clustered around him, mocking him and defaming him with these anthems of shame. Remember the Spartan mother who lifted her skirts to chastise her sons? Where are you running? Back here from whence you came. If a Spartan youth failed to show courage in battle, his fiancée would abandon him. The magistrates would not permit him to marry, or, if he was married already, he and his wife were forbidden to have children. If the warrior had sisters of marriageable age, their suitors would be compelled to part from them. The man's whole family would be shunned. At Thermopylae, in 480 BC, every one of the 300 Spartans died resisting the Persian invaders except one, a warrior named Aristodemus, who was withdrawn at the last minute because of an eye inflammation had rendered him temporarily blind. The next year the Spartans again faced the Persians at Plataea in central Greece. This time Aristodemus was healthy and fought in the front rank. When the battle was over, all who had witnessed his actions agreed that Aristodemus had earned the prize of valor. So brilliant and relentless had been his courage. But the magistrates refused to award him this honor, judging that he was driven by such shame that he risked his life recklessly, deliberately seeking to die. The opposite of shame is honor. Once in India, after years on campaign, Alexander's men threatened to mutiny. They were worn out and wanted to go home. Alexander called an assembly. When the army had gathered, the young king stepped forth and stripped naked. "These scars on my body," Alexander declared, "were got for you, my brothers. Every wound, as you see, is in the front. Let that man stand forth from your ranks who has bled more than I, or endured more than I, for your sake. Show him to me, and I will yield to your weariness and go home." Not a man came forward. Instead, a great cheer rose from the army. The men begged their king to forgive them for their want of spirit and pleaded with him only to lead them forward. By challenging them to show more scars on their bodies than he had on his, Alexander was shaming his men. Warrior cultures and warrior leaders enlist shame, not only as a counter to fear, but as a goad to honor. The warrior advancing into battle, or simply resolving to keep up the fight, is more afraid of disgrace in the eyes of his brothers than he is of the spears and lances of the enemy. boys to men. When they were boys, Alexander and his friends were forced to bathe in frigid rivers, run barefoot till their soles grew thick as leather, ride all day without food or water, and endure whippings and ritual humiliations. On the rare occasions when they got to rest, their trainers would remind them, "While you lie here at ease, the sons of the Persians are training to defeat you in battle." In Sparta, boys were allowed to stay with their mothers till they were 7. At that age, they were taken from their families and enrolled in the agoge, the upbringing. This training lasted until they were 18, when they were considered grown warriors and were enrolled in the army. The boys in training were given one garment, a rough cloak that they wore all year long. They slept outdoors, year round. Each boy carried a sickle-like weapon, called a zili. They were allowed no beds, but instead had to make nests of reeds gathered each night from the river. They were not permitted to cut the reeds with their sickles, but had to tear them with their bare hands. Food for the boys was pig's blood porridge. A visiting Persian envoy was once given a taste of this gruel. "Now I understand Spartan courage in battle, for surely death is preferable to dining upon such sloth." Bad as the food was, the boys got little of it. Instead, they were encouraged to steal. Stealing was no crime, but getting caught was. A boy who got caught was whipped. To cry out was considered a sign of cowardice. It was not unheard of for a Spartan boy to die of a beating without uttering a sound. "In my day," said the 1st century historian Plutarch, "tourists travelled hundreds of miles to witness these scourgings and to behold the courage of the boys enduring them in silence." There was a foot race in Sparta each year among the boys. They ran 10 miles barefoot, carrying a mouthful of water. The boys were not allowed to swallow any of the water, but had to spit it all out at the end of the race. Spartan boys were not permitted to speak to their elders unless spoken to. When addressed by their seniors, they stood in their rough cloaks, hands respectfully inside the garment with their eyes on the ground. Once a Spartan boy stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. Some grown warriors stopped to question him on an unrelated subject. Beneath the cloak, the fox began gnawing at the youth's belly. The boy made no sound, but allowed the beast to bleed him to death, rather than cry out or reveal his deed. Part 2. The External War. Rugged land. Many warrior cultures have arisen in harsh physical environments. Greeks and Macedonians, Romans and Russians, even the British and Japanese, isolated on their resource-poor islands, as well as the Maasai and the Apache, the Zulu and the Bedouin, the clansmen of the Scottish Highlands, in Afghanistan, the Pashtun tribesmen of the Hindu Kush, here in America, the mountain of hill country of Virginia and West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and southern Missouri, not to mention the Carolinas, Georgia, and Texas, has produced outstanding soldiers from the Civil War to the present. The interesting thing about peoples and cultures from rugged environments is that they almost never choose to leave them. When the Persians under Cyrus the Great, who came from the harsh Zagros Mountains in what is today Iran, conquered the lowland Medes 2,700 years ago, the royal advisors assumed that Cyrus would abandon his barren rocky homeland and settle into the good life in the Medes' fertile valleys. But Cyrus knew, as the proverb declares, that soft lands make soft people. His answer became famous throughout the world. Better to live in a rugged land and rule than to cultivate rich plains and be a slave. When Alexander invaded Afghanistan in the 330s BC, he allied himself with numerous tribes and set about making their lives better and easier by building roads into their mountain valleys so that they could trade and prosper. Emerging from winter quarters, the following year, Alexander found all the roads destroyed. The tribes he had built them for had done it. They didn't want trade or prosperity, they preferred isolation and freedom. The idea of a rugged land can be applied psychologically as well. There's a well-known gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps who explains to his young Marines when they complain about pay that they get two kinds of salary, a financial salary and a psychological salary. The financial salary is indeed meager, but the psychological salary, pride, honor, integrity, and the chance to be part of a cause with a history of service, valor, glory, to have friends who would sacrifice their lives for you as you would for them, and to know that you remain a part of this brotherhood as long as you live. How much is that worth? How the Spartans became the Spartans. All warrior cultures start with great men. In ancient Sparta, that man was Lycurgus. He took the city from a normal society to a warrior culture. So that no man would have grounds to feel superior to another, Lycurgus divided the country into 9,000 equal plots of land. To each family he gave one plot. Further he decreed that the men no longer be called citizens, but peers or equals, so that no man might compete with another or put on airs over wealth. Lycurgus outlawed money. A coin sufficient to purchase a loaf of bread was made of iron, the size of a man's head and weighing over 30 pounds. So ridiculous was such coinage that men no longer coveted wealth, but pursued virtue instead. Lycurgus outlawed all occupations except warrior. He decreed that no name could be inscribed on a tombstone, except that of a woman who died in childbirth or a man killed on the battlefield. A Spartan entered the army at 18 and remained in service till he was 60. He regarded all other occupations as unfitting for a man. Once a Spartan was visiting Athens, his Athenian host threw a banquet in his honor. Wishing to show off for his guest, the Athenian indicated several illustrious personages around the table. That man there is the greatest sculptor in Greece, he declared. And that gentleman yonder is its finest architect. The Spartan indicated a servant from his own entourage. Yes, he said, and that man there makes a very tasty bowl of soup. The Athenians, of course, were outstanding warriors in their own right. The great playwright Aeschylus, composing his own epitaph, mentioned nothing of his 90 plays or of any other civilian accomplishment. Here lies Aeschylus the Athenian. Of his courage at the Battle of Marathon, the long-haired Persian could speak much. Lycurgus decreed that no man under 30 could eat dinner at home with his family. Instead, he instituted common messes of 14 or 15 men who were part of the same platoon or military unit. Above the threshold of each mess was a sign that said, "Out of this door, nothing." The point of the common mess was to bind the men together as friends. Even horses and dogs who are fed together, observed Xenophon, form bonds and become attached to one another. The payoff came, of course, on the battlefield. Here's how Spartans got married. Lycurgus wanted to encourage passion because he felt that a child, a boy conceived in heat, would make a better warrior. So a young Spartan husband could not live with his bride. He spent all day training and slept in the common mess. If the young couple were to consummate their love, the husband had to sneak away from his messmates, then slip back before his absence was discovered. It was not uncommon for a young husband to be married for 4 or 5 years and never see his bride in daylight, except during public events and religious festivals. The opposite of fear is love. The greatest counterpoise to fear, the ancients believed, is love. The love of the individual warrior for his brothers in arms. At Thermopylae, on the final morning, when the last surviving Spartans knew they were all going to die, they turned to one of their leaders, the warrior Dionysius, and asked him what thoughts they should hold in their minds in this final hour to keep their courage strong. Dienekes instructed his comrades to fight not in the name of such lofty concepts as patriotism, honor, duty, or glory. Don't even fight, he said, to protect your family or your home. Fight for this alone, the man who stands at your shoulder. He is everything, and everything is contained within him. The soldier's prayer today on the eve of battle remains not, Lord, spare me, but, Lord, let me not prove unworthy of my brothers. Civilians wonder at the passion displayed by wounded soldiers to get back to their units, to return to the fight. But soldiers understand. It is no marvel to them that men who have lost arms and legs still consider themselves fit for battle. So powerful is the passion to return to their brothers and not let them down. All warrior cultures train their youths to feel this love. They make the young men on the passage to warriorhood dress alike, eat and sleep alike, speak alike, wear their hair alike, suffer alike, and achieve victory alike. Ordeals of initiation are undergone not as individuals, but as teams, as units. Courage is inseparable from love and leads to what may arguably be the noblest of all warrior virtues, selflessness. Selflessness. Chapter 14. Plutarch asked, why do Spartans punish with a fine the warrior who loses his helmet or spear, but punish with death the warrior who loses his shield? Because the helmet or spear are carried for the protection of the individual alone, but the shield protects every man in the line. The group comes before the individual. This tenet is central to the warrior ethos. Once Alexander was leading his army through a waterless desert. The column was strung out for miles with men and horses suffering terribly from thirst. Suddenly a detachment of scouts came galloping back to the king. They had found a small spring and managed to fill up a helmet with water. They rushed to Alexander and presented this to him. The army held in place watching. Every man's eye was fixed upon the commander. Alexander thanked his scouts for bringing him this gift. Then without touching a drop, he lifted the helmet and poured the precious liquid into the sand. At once, a great cheer ascended, rolling like thunder, from one end of the column to the other. A man was heard to say, with a king like this to lead us, no force on earth shall stand against us. There's another story of Alexander. When he was getting ready to march out from Macedonia to commence his assault on the Persian Empire, he called the entire army together, officers and men, for a great festival at a place called Dium on the Magnesian coast. When all the army had assembled, Alexander began giving away everything he owned. To his generals he gave great country estates, all properties of the crown. He gave timber lands to his colonels, fishing grounds, mining concessions, and hunting preserves to his mid-rank officers. Every sergeant got a farm. Even privates received cottages and pasture lands and cattle. By the climax of this extraordinary evening, his soldiers were begging their king to stop. What, one of his friends asked, will you keep for yourself? My hopes, said Alexander. Selflessness produces courage because it binds men together and proves to each individual that he is not alone. The act of open-handedness evokes desire in the recipient to give back. Alexander's men knew from their king's spectacular gestures of generosity that the spoils of any victory they won would be shared with them too, and that their young commander would not hoard the bounty himself. We in our day know from history that this was no calculated gesture or grandstanding stunt on Alexander's part. It sprung from the most authentic passions of his heart. He truly cared nothing for material things. He loved his men, and his heart was set on glory and the achievement of such things. Another time, Alexander's army was struggling through the mountains in the dead of winter. One old soldier came straggling into their camp, so frozen from the blizzard that he could no longer see or hear. Troops around the fire cleared a seat for the veteran. prepared a hot broth for him, and helped him thaw out. When the ancient soldier had recovered enough to comprehend his surroundings, he realized that the young warrior who had given him his seat by the fire was Alexander himself. At once the veteran leapt to his feet, apologizing for taking the king's place. "No, my friend," said Alexander, setting a hand on the man's shoulder and making him sit again. "For you are Alexander even more than I." Okay, so we're going to come back. Our next section, we're going to finish off book 2, part 2 of this, with citations for valor. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.